Good afternoon and welcome to the Globe Opinion Debate with the two Republican candidates for governor. My name is Peter Canellis. I am the Globe's editorial page editor, and we look forward to a casual discussion, a freewheeling discussion, something of an unconventional debate, a little more of a discussion back and forth. I'd like to introduce the two candidates immediately to my left. Mark Fisher, businessman from Auburn and member of the Tea Party, and Charles Baker, former Weld administration official and CEO of Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. So thank you so much. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
And I wanted to start off the discussion by talking a little bit about the Republican Party itself here in Massachusetts. It's obviously a small party that has relatively little clout compared to the other state parties in the GOP. The two of you have different political philosophies to some degree. And I want to ask you, how you would go about rebuilding the Republican Party and what the Republican Party needs to do to win more credibility in Massachusetts. And let's start with you, Charlie.
Well, I think the big issue for the Republican Party is you got to show up and engage the debate and run people in races. And that's frankly one of the reasons why I've been involved in politics for as long as I have been. I also think the Commonwealth benefits when you have two teams on the field, two voices, whatever it is you want to call it, engaged in what I call sort of constructive friction. Having worked in a Republican administration, Bill Weld and Paul Cellucci, for 8 years, and having seen what can be done when you have that kind of sort of engagement and discussion, we got a lot of very serious reforms done. We held the line on spending, we cut taxes, we reformed workers' comp, reformed healthcare, county government, welfare. And the Massachusetts economy grew exponentially. We added 500,000 new jobs during the 1990s to our economy. And I think that was a great representation of why it's important to have both teams on the field. And I've been active ever since then in supporting candidates who run for various offices and have tried to do my part with respect to that. I've also served in local government. I think one of the ways people can make a contribution and sort of begin the trek on the political trail, as it were, is to spend time developing a sort of a sense for how it all works in their local communities. Many of the folks who currently serve in the legislature as Republicans started as member of their school committee or their board of selectmen. And I think we need to continue to build on that.
Mark, what's your perspective?
Well, I think your insight is perfectly correct, Peter. The Republican Party is small and getting smaller. And it's a result of the leadership at the top. It's driven membership down to about 11% in the state. You guys ran a poll about 2 months ago that said the Tea Party membership was 14% in the state. How can that be? The Tea Party's bigger than the Republican Party in Massachusetts. I think part of the problem, or the biggest part of the problem, is that the Mass GOP leadership, despite all their talk about being open and inclusive and tolerant, has pushed out conservative groups, whether they be the Tea Party or the Liberty Caucus, the Ron Paul groups, or the Mass Republican Assembly. At the Mass Republican Assembly convention, I was at that one as well as the Mass GOP convention. We have to engage these groups instead of pushing them out. Within the gated community, the Mass GOP leadership, they think everything's fine. That's where they have their big tent. But they've locked out all these other groups. The party of Lincoln has become the party of locked in. And you can't grow a party or any kind of an organization with that kind of an attitude. So I'm reaching out to those groups and reestablishing that fractured party.
But you should be aware, Mark, that there's also an argument out there that says that some of the very conservative positions of the national GOP, they are what hurts Republicans here in Massachusetts. So promising Republican candidates run here in Massachusetts. Somebody points out that if you're running for Congress, that this person's going to be another vote for John Boehner, and what John Boehner does is not very popular around here. So isn't the conservative agenda part of the Republicans' obstacles or an obstacle for the Republican Party here in Massachusetts?
Absolutely not. No one in this state has used those positions and run. They've been afraid of them. Look at what's happened around the country. In New Mexico, we have Governor Martinez. In New Jersey, we have Chris Christie. In Wisconsin, we have Scott Walker, who won in a blue state. And when the unions poured in millions of dollars to get him unelected, recalled, Democrat voters elected him by wider margins, both vote-wise and percentage-wise. These positions you're talking about haven't been used in Massachusetts. I'm running as that candidate. And it will energize the 300,000 Republicans who sat on their couches and Gabriel Gomez could not energize to get out and vote for him. I'm after those guys.
Charlie, there's a difference between the two of you on social issues to some degree. I know, Mark, you've said that the government should not intervene in areas like abortion and gay marriage, but you're not personally in favor of abortion rights or gay marriage. You are in favor of both of those. Does it make sense for the Republican Party here to be a little bit different? You know, we're not Alabama. We can have a conservative alternative in Massachusetts that is a Massachusetts alternative rather than an Alabama alternative.
Well, I guess what I would say is I think in any state party, what you really want is to create your own brand and your own identity. And my brand has always been what I would describe as sort of a Bill Weld brand, because he and Paul Cellucci were my political mentors. And that basically means fiscal conservative, social moderate. And I come by my positions on the social issues to some extent based on personal experience. My brother's gay and married and lives in Massachusetts, and came out a long time ago in the 1980s, and that was a very different time than living sort of anywhere, and especially in a place like Massachusetts would be today. I do think that for the party to be successful in Massachusetts, its greatest opportunity to succeed here is to make the case on fiscal issues. When I think about the candidates who have won in Massachusetts, running statewide, almost to a person, they made the case that they would be tighter on managing the state's fiscal situation, they would be tighter on taxes, they would produce more value for the money, and they would make the race and the debate about what I would call the pocketbook stuff. And I happen to think that that's where Republicans win, and that's where there's a great opportunity to make the case, not just to Republicans, but to independents and Democrats. I mean, I've been campaigning in a lot of places where there are not a heck of a lot of Republicans. I've been campaigning in places like West Roxbury and Dorchester and downtown Worcester and Springfield and Lawrence, and I was in Lowell earlier today. And when I'm talking to people in those communities and I'm talking about why you want two teams on the field, why you want accountability, why you want the transparency that comes with having the constructive friction I mentioned before, why you want a check against the legislature, why you want somebody who has run a big organization before and knows how to get stuff done, why you want people who can behave in a bipartisan way when it's in the best interest of the people of Massachusetts. That story resonates across political lines, across party lines, and I think it's a big part of what we need to do to be successful here.
Mark, do you agree fiscal issues, not social issues?
I do, but your question was about the social issues, and I would say this. I think that voters respect someone who tells them the truth, is candid about it, and not afraid about where you stand on the issues. I think I take the very reasonable position. For example, our state party platform says that every instance of abortion is tragic. That is the language of Hillary Clinton. I mean, I'm agreeing with Hillary Clinton on that. Charlie's to the left of that. In the most recent Supreme Court decision, it was a 9-0 decision on the buffer zone law. I mean, my goodness, I'm agreeing with liberals and conservatives on the court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm agreeing with the ACLU on that. And both pro-life and pro-choice groups should be hailing that decision because it gives women more of an opportunity to get information upon which to make informed choices. But Charlie and the other Democrats, be it Deval Patrick, Martha Coakley, have taken this extreme position and come up with a new buffer zone law. This is ridiculous. I mean, let's be reasonable. 9-0 the Supreme Court rules this. I mean, this is a very reasonable decision. Charlie's got to go to the extreme side of it.
Mark, the new buffer zone law was designed to correct the constitutional flaws that were cited in that decision. You think it doesn't do that? You think it still violates free speech?
I do, and it'll be taken up again at the Supreme Court. Again, it's 9-0. I've been on the sides of sidewalks outside of abortion clinics. The violence done to women is on the inside. Let's get doctors registered so they have admitting procedures at local hospitals. Let's register the healthcare clinics, abortion clinics, so that women have the ability to get the emergency care they need if they need it. That's where the tragedies happen, is inside. Supreme Court Roberts talked about the healthcare people who are giving out information. They're counselors. They're giving out information. These are little old ladies giving out information. And the other side, the extreme side, wants to portray them as protesters. Justice Roberts asked the question, is there any evidence of anything going on side of the sidewalks? And abortion clinics are little branches of the NSA with all their surveillance cameras. None could be documented. None could be documented.
Well, but before the buffer zone law came in, I mean, I had witnessed some of this as a reporter. There were, every Saturday morning, there were screaming, angry, crazy demonstrations on both sides outside of clinics. And while, you know, violence, you know, you have to set terms of what counts as violence, but loud yelling, sign waving, and things like that, I would have found it, you know, if I were going into the hospital for any type of treatment or the clinic for any type of treatment, I would have found that intimidating.
Well, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And so with the 35-foot buffer zone law, I mean, so now are the yelling, screaming people outside of that? No, I think they've gone away. I mean, I disagree with the Supreme Court's ruling about Westboro Baptist Church. They're yelling and screaming at the funerals of fallen soldiers. This is ridiculous. But I'm not seeing any kind of injury done to...
But if the screaming protesters came back, would you then reconsider and consider having a buffer zone, or no?
There are existing laws that prohibit people from interfering with those going into any building, and let's use those existing laws rather than creating new ones.
Well, how about that, Charlie? I mean, you know, you supported the new buffer zone law.
I do.
Is that a restriction on free speech, you think, or not?
Well, I said all along that I thought the balance has to be reached between free speech and a woman's access to healthcare services. And in addition to some of the other people Mark mentioned, the AFL-CIO was on the free speech side of the question on the first buffer zone law. I mean, there were a lot of people on that side of the issue who made for some unusual political bedfellows, which I think spoke to some of the flaws that existed with the statute itself, but certainly not the intent. And I think the new law does accomplish the goal of representing appropriately both points of view. And if it ends up back in the Supreme Court, it will be decided then, and as it should be, because at the end of the day, we're a nation of laws on this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, another controversial Supreme Court decision was the Hobby Lobby decision, and you initially had said, Charlie, that you didn't think it would affect anybody here in Massachusetts, and that was a good thing, that you didn't want it to. You kind of got flack from both sides on that score. But what did you think about how would you clarify your impression of the Hobby Lobby
there's
decision?
sort of a good example of what I guess I would describe as maybe overthinking it a little. I mean, in my mind, what I thought was, well, we have a state law that's in effect for fully insured businesses here in Massachusetts that have to comply with the state law, and the federal law would apply to those self-insured businesses that don't have to comply with the state law. But you might run into situations and circumstances in which you have a company that's big enough to qualify under the federal law, not the state law, but meets the criteria associated with the Hobby Lobby decision. And so my solution to that was to have the family health piece of the Department of Public Health make available for any woman who works for an employer who chooses, because they can under federal law, not to cover 4 of those 20 available contraceptive measures, to be able to access that service through the Department of Public Health. And I'll tell you something, Peter, it's been very interesting to me that so far Martha Coakley, Steve Grossman, and Don Berwick have talked a lot about this decision, but I'm the only candidate in the race who's actually proposed a solution to it to make sure that women have access to those services if they happen to work for an employer who chooses not to cover them.
Yeah, and just to be clear for people who don't know the ins and outs of the Hobby Lobby decision, this was about employers citing a religious objection to supplying contraceptives through their health plan. And Mark, what was your perspective on that?
Well, Charlie mentioned there's 20 different contraceptions that came up in the case, and Hobby Lobby was against 4 of them. And that's what the decision was talking about. And the reason they were against those 4 is because technically they're not contraceptions. They allow conception, but then later on they end that life that was conceived. So here we have 16 contraceptions allowed. I would think that would be enough out of the 20, but this is a big government thing. Charlie's going to put hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money to go to pay for 4 drugs that violate people's conscience and are abortifacients. They're not contraceptions, they're abortifacients. They cause abortion. I think this has gone too far. I mean, why is government stepping in and proposing hundreds of thousands of dollars for these types of drugs when the Supreme Court has said no?
I mean, my view on that's pretty simple. We want to make sure women have access to those services if they want them. And I think in some respects, this makes it possible for employers to act in what they consider to be their religious interests, which, again, based on that decision, is perfectly appropriate, but at the same time makes it possible for women to access those services if they wish to. And I think that's about where we should be on this.
It's not just employers. There are taxpayers out there who feel the same way as Hobby Lobby did, and you're going to take their money and provide these services that violate their conscience. Be happy with the 16 that were approved out of the 20.
Well, we, switching topics a little, we had asked some of the readers on bostonglobe.com to submit potential questions for the two of you. And I wanted to start off, there was a question a reader had for Charlie Baker. One of our readers asked for the details about the turnaround of Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare during the time that you were CEO and what value it had for the public. There's been a lot of discussion in this election cycle about the economics of healthcare. Don Berwick has been out talking about a single payer plan. All of the candidates, Democrats and Republicans, are talking about the need to bring down the cost of healthcare. You were the head of a major insurance company. How were you able to handle the question of cost? Because there are a lot of people out there who are Harvard Pilgrim customers who will say, my premiums went up during that time that Charlie was the CEO. So
I guess I would say, how much time you got? I would say the following. There are three things people should remember about, and this happened a long time ago, so I apologize to the viewing audience if this seems like ancient history. There were three big issues at the time. One was Harvard Pilgrim was not just a health insurance company at that point. It was also a provider organization. Harvard Vanguard was, and remains a significant player in the healthcare delivery side, especially in eastern and central Massachusetts. In addition to that, Harvard Pilgrim owed literally tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions, depending upon how you did the math, to other provider organizations in Massachusetts that they were counting on getting paid for services that they'd provided that Harvard Pilgrim, for a bunch of reasons, hadn't been able to pay for. And number three, it employed about 2,000 people in Massachusetts at that point in time. And so when someone says, I don't really see what the benefit was, I mean, one of the big benefits of the Harvard Pilgrim turnaround was we were able to save all those prepaid group practices that continue to operate today in Massachusetts. You would have been disrupting the healthcare relationships of hundreds of thousands of Massachusetts citizens if that group of provider organizations had gone down at the same time that the plan was going to go down. In addition to that, the size of the deficit that Harvard Pilgrim had with a number of provider organizations on the hospital side would have put a number of hospitals in Massachusetts in serious jeopardy, if not out of business, if we hadn't figured out a way to save the plan. And we did manage to save the vast majority of the jobs of the people who were working at Harvard Pilgrim during that period. I would also argue that over the time that I was there, after we sort of got through the mess of fixing a lot of the stuff that was broken, and there was a lot of it, we grew our membership by about 40% over the course of the next 6 or 7 years, which I think speaks to the fact that we were certainly competitive with the other carriers in the markets we were operating in on price. And in addition to that, we're the #1 ranked plan in the country for customer service and member satisfaction, about which I was enormously proud because it was a huge team effort, according to U.S. News & World Report, for 7 years in a row. So you had a plan that grew its membership by 40%, managed to create an opportunity to pay off a bunch of physician groups and hospitals that we owed a lot of money to on a timely basis, thereby protecting their ability to continue to perform. We also managed to make sure that Harvard Vanguard had the ability to continue to operate and serve the people that it's been serving, and to go on and become a larger part of the healthcare landscape here in Massachusetts. And we also managed to create a team and an organization that did a terrific job in serving its members and its customers.
Now, your position on healthcare, Mark, is pretty much keep the government out. So this was a private health insurer. That sound like a good, that's a good record for you, good
well,
way of handling
it was a private health insurer, but it got to the point where it was too big to fail. That company was saved with a government bailout. Long before anything happened on Wall Street, that was a government bailout. Taxpayers were on the hook for that. Thank God it worked out, but if it hadn't, we'd be footing the bill for it. Unlike small businesses, entrepreneurs who use their own money, if something doesn't work out, they're on the hook. And so the taxpayers that were on the hook, again, thank God it worked out. This sort of leads into the partners deal with Martha Coakley. I think they've allowed to get too big, where they're probably too big to fail. And I'm hoping that the judge next month, when he reviews this, says that it's time for the antitrust laws to kick in.
But when you say keep the government out, I mean, when you say they're too big in antitrust laws, I mean, isn't that the government or Martha Coakley coming in and saying, no, you cannot buy South Shore Hospital? Isn't that a form of intervention by itself?
Yeah, there is some level where free market forces have to play out. But when you get to the level of big monopolies, then the government has to use the antitrust laws to come in, but not in the regular small business happenings. But if companies get to be too big, where it's going to require a company bailout, then that's where I think they should step in with antitrust and break them up.
But don't you think?
Can I say
yeah,
one
yeah,
more?
sure.
You know, I would have expected somebody like Martha Coakley or Steve Grossman to claim that the Harvard Pilgrim situation was a taxpayer bailout. This actually did come up in 2010. The Patrick campaign referred to it as a government bailout. And I pointed out that there was never 1 cent of public money put on the line or invested in anything associated with the Harvard Pilgrim turnaround. The people who would have lost would have been the provider organizations we owed money to, the bondholders on the debt that we had incurred, and the employees who would have been out of work. But there was never any state money on the line at all. And I would argue, in fact, that the fact that we did save Harvard Pilgrim, thereby making it possible for us to make the payments we needed to make to those provider organizations, prevented putting the state in a position where it might have had to go back and figure out whether or not it wanted to save some of these provider organizations that were on the ropes at that particular point in time. But there was no taxpayer bailout associated with it, Mark.
The deal worked, and thank God it did, but if it hadn't, we would have been on the hook.
Do you agree with Mark that Partners has become too big and has too much market clout?
Look, I've said for over 10 years now that I think one of the biggest problems we face in healthcare is there's no transparency around much of anything. You can learn more about a dishwasher or a refrigerator than you can about the quality of the healthcare you're getting just by going on the internet. And I've said for a long time, I think all providers should have to post their prices for services that they render. I think performance data that the state currently collects should be made publicly available. And I think if you're a great provider and you do a great job and you do it for a reasonable cost, you should be allowed to brag about that. But the way the system is set up now, there's no transparency around anything. So the same service provided to the same person with the same outcome at 4 different provider organizations within a few miles of where we are right here can vary in price by 300 or 400%. And the low-cost provider never has an opportunity to explain how terrific they are at providing the same service at a reasonable price. And the high-cost provider never gets called to account for being the high-cost provider in a region. So for me, let's make the system more transparent so that high-cost players have to justify why they're high-cost players. As far as the Partners thing is concerned, I've been in healthcare for a long time, and I get the fact that it's complicated, but I think the negotiation between Martha Coakley and Partners led to an incredibly complicated settlement that I think will be very, very hard to enforce. And I have made suggestions and recommendations on what I think would have been a much simpler solution. So on that one, I think my big worry about this is I think it's going to be very hard 2-3 years from now when you have a different attorney general and a different set of players involved trying to figure out exactly what it is people agreed to.
So would you just let Partners take over South Shore?
No, what I said was I had sort of 4 big points. Number one was I don't think they should be allowed to expand their doc network by 550 physicians. I think that expansion will probably come out of other lower cost providers that operate in and around the region and destabilize them, which will just make the whole system more expensive. When I talk to other people in the market about what they're getting in terms of rate increases, 0 to 1% seems to be about where the market is overall. Partners is going to be allowed under that agreement to get inflation, which will become the floor and not the ceiling, which is significantly above where other people are. I think the deal should be no increases for 5 years anyway, because that seems to be what everybody else is getting, and they start with a competitive advantage. I also think they should be required to post their prices. I think if Partners post their prices, other people will follow, and probably follow pretty quickly, which I think would be a really good thing.
And you're going to stick with this as governor? I mean, there are a lot of ways for governors to say, this really isn't their issue, we'll let the free market decide, defer to the attorney general. You as governor would step in and insist that over the next 5 years there'd be no increases if Partners wants to buy South Shore, no increases across the board at all of Partners' outlets?
Well, it depends a lot, I guess, on what happens with the settlement agreement, right? I mean, if the agreement ultimately gets approved by the judge, I think at that point a governor's ability to do something about the settlement will be limited. But I can promise you that as governor, we are going to have a transparent healthcare system where everybody's going to know how much people get paid for services and how they perform. because I think it's high time for the public to know as much about their healthcare provider as they know about the person the entity they purchased their TV from.
Having wrestled with that healthcare behemoth, now we're going to go through some our lightning round of quick issues where you guys should offer a one-word response or as possibly close to it, depending on what the question is. So, Mark, we're going to start with you. Name a current politician who's a role model for you.
Scott Walker.
Charlie?
Current politician?
Yeah.
Currently serving in office.
No, in the arena though.
I mean, can I pick somebody like Ronald Reagan, or is that because he's
No,
dead?
he's
Too
dead.
far
He's dead.
gone.
You can't
Okay,
pick
all right. You know, you're kind of stumping me here. How about Jeb Bush?
Good. Mark, do you support the ballot question that would unlink the gas tax from inflation?
Yes.
Charlie?
Me too.
Let's switch and we'll start with Charlie on this one. Should Boston host the Olympics?
I think Boston should do the research associated with hosting the Olympics.
One-word answer, yes.
Yeah, one word answer, Charlie. Yeah, what do you want?
Yes.
Yes. Charlie, should Boston have a statue for Donna Summer?
I'm perfectly willing to consider it.
Not at taxpayers' expense.
How about a library named for Billy Bulger?
I would say no.
Not at taxpayers' expense.
All right, now we're going to start with Mark again here. Have you ever shopped at Market Basket?
I haven't.
Yes.
Should
They are cheaper.
Should Deval Patrick have tried to step in and mediate the dispute? At
No.
Market Basket?
Yes.
Non-compete clauses, good or bad?
Bad.
Can be good.
All right, now we're going to start with Charlie.
Depending.
Okay.
That one, we should be allowed a little wiggle room on that one. It depends a lot on what it says, don't you think?
Okay. Charlie, should Cambridge allow Uber and Bridge, the private transportation competitors, to operate?
Yes.
Yes.
Summer's waning. We're not going to pretend it isn't. What's your favorite Massachusetts beach?
Probably Eisman's Beach in my hometown of Swampscott.
Cranes Beach.
Do we need a governor's council?
Yeah, I think they serve a purpose.
Okay. Mark?
That's an iffy one. I'm going to say no.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's our lightning round. But now, Mark, I want to ask a question that's specific to you. We had the question from readers. Your website talks about how at various points in your career you have been unemployed, but it also talks about how you've quickly bounced back through hard work, determination. You once took out a lien on your house. The implications of that story seem to be that you're skeptical of government assistance to the unemployed. In what cases, why don't you explain your views on that? Do you feel like the government should be available to people and when they lose their jobs?
Oh, God, no. I've been on unemployment all those times. That was a big help for me. I was on transitional assistance, and I make the case that transitional assistance should be doing just that, transitioning people from unemployment to jobs, not transitioning it from generation to generation.
But it seemed to work then in your
It
case,
did
right?
work. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
all for it. I mean, it was
Oh, yeah.
it was a great thing. You know, I tell the story that there was one time I was out of work for 9 months, and it was during the summertime, and my kids had a lemonade stand, and they brought in $7 or $8 that day. They earned more during that 9-month period than I did, and I was collecting unemployment, but I didn't earn it. Thank God for it. It's there for the needy, not for the greedy. So when we have all these abuses in the EBT card system, $400 million worth of abuse and fraud, we give EBT cards to over 1,000 dead people. I told the story, I think it was at our last debate. I was at Rosie's place, the shelter for homeless women, and before I had a chance to talk about illegal immigration and reforming EBT card system, they asked me, what are you going to do about illegal immigration? They're coming here, stepping in line, they're taking our beds, they're taking our services, and they wanted to know about what I was going to do to reform EBT card so that 1,000 dead people weren't getting their benefits. They're there for the needy, Peter, people who are out of work, but not for the greedy who are stealing from it. I'm on the website too. I'm insisting that photo ID is put on every card, no exceptions. And for hardship cases where the person is homebound or bedridden, then the caregiver's photo goes on the card as well. No cash from ATMs, so they can go in and use it for things that they're not supposed to be using it for: alcohol, tobacco, pornography, tattoos. Insisting on a drug test that they have to pass. We're not going to be rewarding bad behavior. And I'm insisting, like Governor Martinez in New Mexico, that we bring back workfare, like President Clinton did. And for those people who are eligible and physically able, they're provided work opportunities.
So is it safe to assume that other than rooting out fraud, you are comfortable with the safety net as it exists right now?
Oh, absolutely. For the needy, not for the greedy.
Charlie, you're a former Human Services Secretary for the Commonwealth. Are you comfortable with the way the safety net is functioning now under Governor Patrick?
Well, I would agree with a number of Mark's points about some of the fraud and abuse issues, especially in the EBT program, which certainly needs to be tightened up. I mean, you had 2 audits done on this, both by Democrats, one by the Inspector General and one by the Auditor, both of which raised, I think, a lot of red flags about the way that program operates. And there's no question that nothing makes people more unhappy with the state of their government than a government that doesn't do a good job managing its programs, whatever programs you're talking about. And I hear about this when I'm out on the campaign trail too, and I don't hear about this just from Republicans. I hear about this from Democrats and independents. I hear about it in cities. I hear about it sort of everywhere I go. I mean, it's a real significant issue in the minds of the public at large, and we should do everything we can to make sure those programs work and work the way they're supposed to. In addition to that, I think we should be cognizant of the fact that Massachusetts is on its way at spending $500 million to break and then try to fix a perfectly functioning healthcare connector that we had operating in Massachusetts before the administration and the health connector tried to overlay the federal reform plan on Massachusetts. We had 98% of our people covered. The health connector, I think, would have been completely justified in going to the federal government and to saying, look, we're not ready to go. We'd like to waive this thing for a year. The Attorney General had 3 representatives on that connector. The governor had many representatives on that connector. I think they should have put their heads together and gone to the feds and said, you know what? We have a system that's working. Give us a waiver. Don't make us go forward with this thing because we don't know what the consequences will be. But $500 million is a lot of money, and that's basically where we're heading on this at this point in time. I think the way the state managed the DCF issues, you know, whether it was my plan or some other plan, the simple truth of the matter is we needed a plan, and that should have been abundantly evident to the governor and to the Attorney General when the Children's Rights Group in Baltimore filed that lawsuit against them. Anybody who read that brief that was written by the Children's Rights Group there would have to conclude that our child welfare system had some serious problems that needed to be addressed. And instead of getting into an argument with them about how bad the problems really were, the Commonwealth, I think, should have gone ahead and agreed that fixing this was a more important strategy than fighting it. And we all know where that ended up in the end, which was, you know, big-time tragedy for a number of families.
Mark, if you had been governor when the Jeremiah Oliver case came down and the Department of Children and Families was cited for having missed some crucial checks with that family, what would you have done starting right the day of that news came out?
Yeah, I've said this from the beginning. I think that not only with DCF, but with the drug lab scandal and the compounding pharmacy scandal, the solution here is to make employees, government employees, mandated reporters of fraud, abuse, and procedural problems. Because these are big organizations, and the heads of them have talked about these problems being deep down inside, and they couldn't find them out. Okay, well, what's the solution? As soon as someone finds a problem, and by the way, Annie Dugan's coworkers knew that she couldn't be doing all of those tests in the time period she was. They knew it, but they were afraid to say anything because they didn't have whistleblower protection. Let's give them whistleblower protection. Let's make them mandated reporters. They have to report outside of the organization, to the media, to law enforcement. It doesn't have to work its way up and then have somebody deal with it. I think that keeps the problem small, and it gets out to the media, gets out to the public. We can deal with it immediately.
So is your view on DCF that in the Oliver case, particularly if they had just made those checks, everything would have been fine and there's no larger reform necessary?
No, not at all. I think that if they had made their checks, if they had visited there once a month, it wouldn't have saved him. I mean, these are much, much bigger issues. that deal with cultural problems. I mean, the father of that young boy who died, Jeremiah, hadn't seen him in 2 years. And the reason he hadn't seen him is because the mom had a restraining order against him. You know, he has 6 children by 3 different women. He's living, you know, in a different state. He was arrested for dealing heroin or cocaine to an undercover police officer. These are problems in the family, and now we're asking the state to put a Band-Aid on it and correct it. I think we can do better, and I think at our last debate as well, that I know foster families who said that the process is so inefficient. For example, a foster mom has 3 children. Well, there's a care provider associated with each of the 3 children, so she has to have visits 3 times a month from 3 different people. This is crazy. Why don't we have a caregiver for the family, not for the individual, and have all the paperwork, and that would make things so much more efficient.
Charlie, you want to weigh in on DCF anymore?
I put a pretty significant plan forward right after the Jeremiah Oliver story broke, and whether, as I said, whether it was my plan or some other plan, I think that one deserved and justified a far more urgent approach on the part of the Commonwealth than we saw, and I think that was unfortunate and tragic for many of the people who are involved.
Charlie, one other issue now between you and Mr. Fisher is on gun rights. Massachusetts has some of the toughest gun laws in the country. It doesn't mean there aren't some ways in which we're not all that tough, and things like mental health checks. But people generally credit it for also having the lowest violent crime rate in the country. Comfortable with where we are with gun restrictions?
Well, there were 3 big things I wanted to see come out of the gun legislation that was before the Commonwealth over the course of the previous few months. One was a connection to the mental health registry system, which we got, which, by the way, most of the people I know who own guns support. Number 2, an increase in the penalties for crimes committed using a gun, because I think too many times historically that part of an arrest got pled out because people didn't. It was easy to plead it out, and I think that's unfortunate. I think in many cases enhancing the penalties for those crimes is a good idea. And the third issue for me was finding some home for tracking and pursuing illegal gun trafficking. It doesn't really belong to the local level, local law enforcement. It doesn't really belong to the feds. It's like this big open, I wouldn't call it a loophole, but this opportunity to do something at the state level. And I think the fact that the final legislation included the mental health reforms, included the stiffer penalties, and also created for the first time a statewide task force on illegal gun trafficking, I think those are wins for people who are concerned about gun violence and gun safety, and I support the law that was enacted.
So, Mark, do you want to roll back Massachusetts' gun laws at this point?
It's an amazing thing. This recent law did do that. It made it less strict in one regard. Massachusetts was the only state to require an FID card for pepper spray. My mom's 83. She had to get an FID card to buy pepper spray. This new law has removed that restriction. So in that one sense, we took this step in the right direction. But I think the time spent by the legislature and the governor would have been better spent on those areas where people are being harmed and deaths are occurring. That's government incompetence. And we just mentioned DCF and the drug lab scandal, and compounding pharmacy scandal. Government incompetence resulted in deaths and injuries there. Why not take some time and introduce laws that correct that problem as opposed to going against law-abiding gun owners? And I think what's happened here is state senators, state legislators craft a bill. You know, it's owned by the Democrats, the legislature is, and the governor. They can move things through very quickly if they want to, and they did. They can pat themselves on the back and say, look what we did for you. The problem is it's government incompetence that's caused these failures. That's what they should be attacking.
But there are people out there, including many gun rights supporters, who are saying, let's get rid of the state assault weapons ban. Would you get rid of it?
I would.
Would you get rid of background checks for gun buyers?
Oh, no, that's fine. We are there, yeah.
You want to stick with that? Yeah. Stick with the background check? What other restrictions would you keep, and what would you get rid of?
There was a time, back in the 60s when it first came through, that an FID card, you did your checks and it was issued for life. And now it's every 3 years. I think it costs $150. I would want to say, let's do a background check, and that's it. And then these are Second Amendment rights that people have. and let's remove that 3-year period for renewing the FID card.
So in other words, permanent, once you're clear forever?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. When I got my FID card, I mean, there's strict review processes. I counted the laws that were in place. If you broke any one of them, you couldn't own a gun in Massachusetts. There were 98. The moral of the story, Peter, I tell people is if you want a good neighbor, find yourself a law-abiding gun owner because they have to be squeaky clean. They've already been vetted by local police chiefs.
Now, the Democrats running for Attorney General are saying that one of the solutions to the gun issue and to gun rights generally is smart guns. I mean, you were suggesting before having photo IDs for people who are on public benefits. What about having some sort of a system where only the gun owner can shoot the gun? That can check their fingerprints and is that a solution that you could live with?
I mean, it sounds like a good idea. I don't think it's going to solve anything. I mean, I think the problem is violence. We've had a rash of stabbings recently. I mean, it's not the weapon, it's the violence, and people are.
But a lot of these weapons that people have gotten that are committing crimes, were bought by other people. That's the easiest way around gun laws. They're illegal guns, and you're not in favor of illegal guns. Nobody running for office is. Why not have a provision on the gun or a technological aspect to the gun where you can't transfer it from the owner to somebody else?
If I thought it would solve a problem, I'd be all for it. I don't think it does. I don't think it does. Again, it's
criminals will always find a way around it. Is that the idea?
Or they'll have another weapon of choice. I mean, I think it's the violence problem, and I think violence stems in Ferguson from despondency or hopelessness, government dependence. I want to create jobs in Massachusetts. I have a 4-point program to do that. People get a job. There's a whole sense of well-being that comes about having a job. They're being productive. It goes not only to the individual, but their family, the community, the neighborhoods. I want to reduce the corporate income tax and make it comparable to those states that we're driving businesses out to. I want to stop the overburdensome rules and regulations to do the same thing and keep businesses from coming in. I want to stop the taxpayer funding of fad industries like Evergreen Solar, which took 58 million taxpayer dollars after 2 years, closed its doors, moved to China. 800 people lost their jobs. And I want to get rid of the inventory tax, which keeps big distribution centers from coming here, taking advantage of our central location. And those distribution centers will bring with them material handling jobs, logistics jobs, administrative jobs, and transportation jobs. Let's get people jobs.
That obviously toggles into the state's economic future for the next 10 years. And this is a good final question to sort of wrap up with, because it gives you a chance to talk about your vision for Massachusetts. Let's say you are governor for 8 years. Where do you want the state to be in the sort of biggest possible terms? And we'll start with you, Charlie. 8 years after Baker takes over, what is Massachusetts going to look like and feel like, and what are people going to be saying about it?
Well, if all goes according to plan, I would want to get to the point where your zip code doesn't determine the quality of the school you go to. I've talked a lot over the course of this race about the achievement gap, the opportunity gap in education. We have a lot of great schools in Massachusetts. We have a lot of great school districts, but we have a lot of schools that simply aren't getting it done on behalf of kids, and they need to be better. And I've talked a lot about how I think we can get there. So for me, one of the most important things we can do for our communities, for our families, for ourselves, is make sure that every kid gets a good education here in Massachusetts. Second, we have two economies in Massachusetts for all intents and purposes, kind of the inside 128 and the outside 128 economy. And I've talked a lot about creating strategies and tactics to grow our economy in places outside 128 by taking advantage of some of the intrinsic industries that already exist there. I mean, when you're out in the Pioneer Valley, there are 3,000 machinists working out there, and at any given time there's 500 skilled to 1,000 skilled worker jobs out there. And when you talk to the employers and the businesses out there about that, they say that, they simply can't find enough qualified people. Well, inside 128, we all think about biotech and high tech and education and finance. Out there, what we really need to be thinking about is how do we do a much better job with voc tech and community college and apprenticeship programs to get kids into these programs so that they can take these positions. So for me, one of the big things I want to see us do is actually get committed to this idea that what drives the economy in different parts of Massachusetts isn't necessarily what drives it when you look out the window of the State House. And I think the third thing would be, I want to live in a state where people really think their communities are safe and thriving. And I've spent a lot of time talking to what I describe as sort of social entrepreneurs, people who have put blood and sweat and equity and all kinds of human, personal equity into revitalizing really distraught, downtrodden neighborhoods and turning them into places where, Main Street is full of businesses and where, property values are starting to go up and where the people who live in the houses own them and where the crime rates have gone down. And when you talk to these people, there's a set of themes and strategies that comes out of those conversations that says to me that I wouldn't call it a formula, but there's a know-how to this that we should be leveraging as a Commonwealth and making available and bringing to some of our communities that are in more trouble. I mean, my first stop as a candidate was at UMass Lowell, up in Lowell, because it was outside 128, it was a gateway city, and they had a wonderful public-private partnership with a whole bunch of polymer and plastics manufacturers up in the Merrimack Valley. I mean, for me, the goal here is a great Massachusetts, and a great Massachusetts is one where if you want to work, you can, where if you send your kid out the door in the morning, you think they're getting the kind of education that they're going to need to prepare themselves for their future, and where every community is a place where people really do believe that, tomorrow's going to be better than yesterday. And we have plenty of those in Massachusetts, but nowhere near enough. And that's where I want to see Massachusetts 8 years from now.
Mark, you talked a few minutes ago about your tax plans.
Sure.
Beyond that, though, 8 years of governorship, what will the state look like when you're finished?
I think it starts, Peter, with assessing the situation. Where is Massachusetts now? 4 years ago, Charlie got it right. He said Massachusetts was a mess. And yet when he kicked off last fall for this campaign, he said Massachusetts is fine. That's not correct. Massachusetts is worse off. We've doubled the number of food stamp recipients. We've tripled the cost of entitlement programs. We have over 220,000 illegal immigrants here, and it's making our cities and towns dysfunctional. The mayors are saying they're on the verge of becoming Detroit. And so how do I fix that? First, we make Massachusetts business friendly, as I pointed out in my 4-point program. I want to do for Massachusetts what Governor Scott Walker has done for Wisconsin. In 3 short years, when he started, there were tens of billions of dollars in deficits, and now there's a $1 billion surplus. I mean, even New York, liberal New York, is now second among the states in job growth because they've made tax incentives and they're driving businesses to New York. That's the first thing we do. And then we look at all these entitlement programs. They're there for the needy, like I said, but we reform them. $400 million in abuse and fraud. I talked about putting the cards, the photo IDs on the cards. I talked about no ATM cash. We're bringing back workfare. These are things that will make people believe in these programs again and ensure that taxpayer dollars are being well spent. And then also, I've said this from beginning when I kicked off, illegal immigration will be illegal. $2 billion each year is taken from the taxpayers and rewarded to those who break the law. I mean, if you take that number and divide it by the 351 cities and towns in the Commonwealth, it's over $5 million in local aid. Teachers, firefighters, police officers, that money can go there or elsewhere. It's making our cities and towns dysfunctional. We are a compassionate people, but we're over capacity right now. And one last thing, Common Core education standards are gone. Teachers are allowed to teach.
You're bringing in other issues. Charlie, do you want to respond at all on the immigration issue or the Common Core? You just have a chance to.
Well, I was the one person in Massachusetts who testified against Common Core 4 years ago before the Board of Education because we were being asked to buy off on something that didn't exist yet, where we had a system in place, the MCAS exam and the curriculum frameworks that we developed here that I thought were working pretty well. I don't like the idea of turning what I believe is our greatest competitive advantage, which is our education system, over to a federal enterprise to sort of tell us how to do it and how it should work. And I worry a lot about the fact that there wasn't much process associated with that when it was first developed. And what I would say has happened over the course of the past few years is even people I know who are fans of Common Core conceptually and like the idea, almost to a person, they say the rollout and the implementation has been ham-handed at best and a disaster at worst. So I remain a pretty significant skeptic on this one.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. We're running out of time now. That concludes our debate with the Republican gubernatorial candidates. I want to thank Mark Fisher and Charlie Baker for joining us. And I also want to encourage everybody who watched today to tune in tomorrow, 2 p.m. We're going to have a debate between the Democratic candidates for Attorney General, live streamed on bostonglobe.com. Thank you.